Hey, what's going on, guys? So I wanted to show you guys a quick demonstration of a tool that I've been working on. I put a post out a while ago, asking if anybody was interested in seeing a code review of one of the tools that I wrote. And as I'm cleaning it up and expanding it a little bit more, I'm kind of getting excited. So I kind of want to show you guys what it does now. And then when you go into the code review, you'll kind of understand how I got some of these features working. But so not to take up any of your time. So this particular tool in question what we're talking about is going to be my lab configuration generator. The motivation for this was as I'm studying for my CCIE, I do a lot of labs, and a lot of those labs require different, implementations of the same technology. So instead of doing it all in the same topology, I like to have different labs for specific purposes. So whether I'm focusing on um, ISIS for the IGP or OSPF for the IGP in a topology, I want to be able to on the fly create configurations and then do testing with that particular topology. And usually starting out, that's the hardest part. Not really the hardest part, but it's the most time consuming. Getting the base interfaces set up, getting your base OSPF processes up, establishing your MPBGP sessions. A lot of that is not stuff that when you're starting in into the more advanced topics, you don't really need to be fondling over to get it configured. So just for the ease of sake time and allowing me to be more efficient and more focused on a particular technology, I needed something to help me template it out and build these configs on the fly without me really thinking about it. So looked around some options. I saw Ansible. Um, I like Ansible. Ansible's great, but Ansible has its shortcomings for me from the aspect of it's a tool that's not necessarily built for the networking world. It's great and adopted into the world, but it's a systems tool. I mean, it was initially out for servers and stuff like that. So it's not necessarily ideal for us, and it's heavy. There's a lot of bloat to it because there's a lot of unnecessary stuff that I don't need that'll be in there. So I didn't see the point of using Ansible. So I kind of understood how Ansible was getting after their templating, and I kind of took that and implemented it in my own tool, but gave myself a little bit more features that is more specific to what we're doing in the networking world, and that's actually providing the templates of the configurations. So that way, as you fill out the data schemas, it'll actually generate config files for you. So that's essentially where this tool came from. So when I wrote it originally, I wrote it specifically with like a one mind track of Cisco, Cisco, Cisco. And recently I went back, revisited it, refactored a lot of stuff, and I did a lot of abstraction, and I'm making it very generic. So now I'm building in so I can generate any kind of configuration that I want. Um, from Juniper, Cumulus, Cisco, it doesn't matter. All that'll be built into it, as time goes on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and just do a demonstration. So this the lab configuration generator, I built an interface, an API interface on top of it. So right now we're actually able to do web calls. So this right here is an example of a basic request. If we were going to try to do, let's look at this one first. If we were trying to do an iOS router. Now, this data model here is what makes the router config, and as you can see, it's pretty long, but it's actually not complicated. A lot of it is multiple interfaces and then specific options on an interface. So kind of some of the features that I built into the templating engine. Like all the SNMP configs, as you know, you can have multiple SNMP v3 configs for different collectors or whatever the case is. So I wanted to give the flexibility of doing that base and then also specifying what type of communication mode you're going to have, whether it's the no off no priv and off no priv and off privs, and then you got all the um, um, related options for those particular modes. Even with the SNMP v2, I gave you the ability to add multiple community strings. Now, interfaces. This was a big thing for me because I wanted to make sure that I had pretty much any option that I needed to configure an interface already here. And, for the most part, properties of an interface is pretty generic across any kind of manufacturer. So I needed to make sure that as you fill this template out, it's not specific to Cisco or whatever vendor that you're used to working with. It's very generic. So with that being said, like Cisco devices, they support secondary IP. So I got the ability, I built it into where, if you add the first IP, anything after the first IP would be considered a secondary IP on the interface. I built in options for OSPF, so you can actually do configuration settings from OSPF onto the interface, and then do authentication. I can do the cryptographic authentication, the plain text or the null. I built in all the different options that are available for that as well. Um, what else? IPv6. I did all the different IPv6 flavors. So, if you want to do a link local address, it'll allow you to configure a link local. It'll EUI64. So, based off of these keys, the application knows what configuration line to utilize and then import that into the config. So, just to show you guys what that looks like, if I send it to the API and get the request back, we go down and we look at what the full config looks like. And essentially this is what it looks like. So I tried to, in this implementation for my examples, I'm going to try to implement every single feature that I have implemented, so that way you can see the tool actually at work. But essentially this is something that out of the box you can give to a client, or you can use in your own environment, and then generate your configs. And then the most beautiful thing about this is that the way I wrote this is that I made it as modular to where you can add your own templates, and then you can match up with the schemas that I already have defined. So if you need to make a little bit more specific template to your environment, you can do that on the fly without no problems. And it's so modular that you don't need to know anything about the internals of how the application is actually ingesting your data model, because it's already predetermined for you based off of the schema. So um, yeah, that's where we're at now with it. Show you guys like a cumulus VX. So pretty much the options are the same. And like for the instance, like one of the difference with the cumulus routers is that it uses CIDR notation whenever it's specifying the IP addresses on the interfaces. So instead of doing the net mask, I put the CIDR notation, and then it'll actually the tool knows this based off of the schema that's defined for it, and it'll automatically inject that. So if I add that and I hit send, now you see a basic configuration to get a cumulus router up and running. And so I'm still building out the templates itself, but the biggest thing is I've been doing is just testing out the core of this tool to make sure that it's working as intended. So like this is one, and then I created another endpoint on the API outside of the configuration is the generate. So like especially when I'm doing Linux stuff, there's a lot of times that I'll run commands or I'll do a bunch of stuff on my box and then I completely forget about it, like when I come and look at it later. Especially when it comes down to doing like static routes and networking and all that stuff within the Linux machine. So I created another endpoint within my lab configuration generator called the generate endpoint, which allows me to do different functions. So like this particular one is allowing me to actually add static routes to a Linux box. So I created a schema that allows you to say a list of routes, put the device ID, the network ID, the CIDR notation, as well as the gateway IP, and it'll actually give you the configuration for you to dump on your Linux box. So, like I said, this is in my next video, I'll go into way more into depth on how this works, so you guys can have an idea of the implementation. But for the most part, this was a really fun tool for me, and I do plan on making it an open source product. Probably one of the things I'm gonna probably lean onto the community with is template ideas, and just coming up with examples. It would be cool to kind of have some people working on specific vendors, and kind of work out what a full config looks like on a specific vendor, so that way just from a community standpoint, have a nice solid configuration tool that'll work. Oh, you know what? I just forgot about something too. So another thing too is that part of this is that one of the things that I was doing in my labs is that I was saving text documents into a folder and creating directories every single time, and that's cool, but after a while it's gets a little annoying to maintain. So part of this tool too is that I actually have a backend database. It's talking to a MongoDB instance, so all the other ones before you, we were just actually just configuring, we were just actually getting the response back from the API. The API wasn't actually storing anything in the database. But in this one, I actually have it to where I can do a store true key in the options, and it'll actually save let's go ahead and do that. It'll actually save the configuration, so I need to change the response to JSON. And it'll say successfully updated. And if I go to my database, let's look that up. QNAP Mongo connect, and then LCG API collections. Nope, it should be LCG collections. There we go. And so you can see this is the configuration from the same device there. And we could change the dev type. Well, actually, let's change the host name to RACA test. So bam, successfully updated. Now if I go to my record, refresh, and then I should see oh, you know what? I think I probably was in the wrong database. Hold on, let's make sure. So successfully. Okay, yeah, I was in the wrong database. There it is. Oh, there it is. Okay, so yeah, here we go. And then you can see the update there, and it actually shows the returns that it was actually updated and that it's stored. So now it gives me the ability to now in my database I can say the lab name, I can put the device name, and then it'll also store that for me. So if I want to go and reference the configuration again, I can just go back. And this is just lab purposes, but there's so many different things that we can do with this tool. When you start getting into the world of config management, compliance, stuff like that, um, I'm working on another project that I'm gonna probably incorporate this tool into. But yeah, just a high level demo, but hopefully soon I can get you guys the code review video. All right, thanks again. Later.